So tonight's class is going to be a little different. I thought it would be good for everyone to kind of take a deep breath. We're going to put a pause on all of the password reset work. We're going to finish that up tomorrow. Hopefully we can do the password reset kind of at the first third of class tomorrow and leave the other 2/3 open for capstone questions and progress. However, tonight we are going to do a little bit of a review. We're going to start with JavaScript and ES6 features. I'm going to try and make it a little interactive with a scorecard and a leaderboard so we can kind of keep track of who's answering what questions, make sure everyone gets an opportunity to go. And then we are going to do a review on some different concepts. So things that you may have been using that you have no idea what the terms are. Things like REST and MVC and a couple other things on the list. We're going to go through them kind of the last third of class tonight and make sure that you're exposed to those concepts. And then we are going to roll into a whiteboarding interview and kind of talk about what you can expect there. Has anyone done a whiteboarding interview yet from a coding perspective?
No.
Okay, so we will go through one of those and see what that is like. But to kick it off, I am actually going to start my VS Code. And for once, I'm going to ask you guys not to open your own. I am going to actually open a blank VS Code that you guys can all type into, because tonight you are going to be writing some code in mega pair programming style. So I'm just going to call this day 3. Again, you do not have to create this. This is just a little playground that we can play around with some JavaScript concepts. I'm going to call this playground.js, and I'm going to start a live share with everyone. And I am requesting that everyone join this because everyone's going to write some code tonight. That's one.
So should we be?
You do not need to open your
VS
own. You just need to open the direct share link. Nothing's getting turned in tonight. We're just going to play around with some JavaScript concepts. And while you guys are getting into that, I'm actually going to pull up my leaderboard and get it configured with everyone's names. And I see 6 of you are already in.
It's in read-only mode, Max.
Are you kidding me?
No.
We try again.
No,
It's
type in.
working out. All right.
It may be read only
Now
if
edit.
you join anonymously.
Okay, because mine is read only also. So go back in and don't hit join anonymous.
Yeah, my guess is it won't let you edit if you're in anonymously. So
Okay.
you may need to sign in order to be able to edit.
Okay.
And now that you guys all have your GitHub set up, it should let you in to edit. Hopefully.
We should be in GitHub.
No, you just need to make sure that you can edit. And in order to edit, you might need to be in. You might need to sign in using GitHub. But you're in already, Christy, so you're good to go.
Oh, okay.
I think I need to be kicked out.
Doug, can you send me that link in a direct message?
Yes.
So I can open it on my iPad? Okay, thank you.
You want direct in the Zoom or in Slack?
Oh, in Slack. So
Okay.
yeah, thank you.
Would I really have to make a whole new GitHub to change my name?
To change your username, possibly. If it's just your profile name, you may not have to.
Okay, it just irritates me that it's 2 C's in it, but okay. Like, how you can't spell your own name correctly?
You know how many times I've typed Max Matthews with 1 T and been like, oh, come on, there was a second T. Okay, and then I believe, let me see if it will let me. We are going to keep a scoreboard going here for the questions tonight. And I am also going to pull up, we have for once, a pretty filled out outline. So I'm going to head to the schedule. It's also in Canvas today, but these are the topics that we are going to review. And then once we get to the end of the list, before we jump into these, if there are any other JavaScript concepts that you would like to review, we can dive into them. So let's briefly touch on what ES6 is. ES6, also sometimes called ECMAScript, I believe 2015, is the 6th version of JavaScript that came out. And almost all programming languages get updates at some point as users use other programming languages and compare it to JavaScript, or they just have a good idea, they see someone else using it, or they see a need in the language. This body gets together and agrees on the standard of what JavaScript is going to be. And then eventually those features roll out to our JavaScript runtime engines, whether that's Node, whether that's a web browser, whether that's, lots of different places that we can execute our JavaScript. But there are some shifts that happen where we go, okay, everyone knows that var is kind of out and constant and let is the way to go, but we want to be able to understand what the differences are between them and also be comfortable with using a var because a lot of legacy code is going to have var all over the internet. So we are going to be asking a bunch of questions. Tonight, there are going to be labeled 1, 2, and 3, 1 for easy, 2 for medium, 3 for hard. And I am keeping a scoreboard, and that is the link that I dropped down in the chat. So I'm going to be keeping track of everyone's score on here. If anyone pulls too far into the lead, they will be barred from answering questions, and it's going to be on the rest of the class to step up. Zach, no, you cannot give yourself points. And no, I did not pay for the paid version of this to be able to lock that out. But I am keeping a track of the points just as a kind of gamification. So let me just modify. I think I looked in here earlier and I can enter the increments of 0, 1, 2, and 3 and -1 in case I go overboard. Okay. So we are going to kick it off with a number 1 question. Who can write a variable? And you're going to be using the raise hand button a ton in Zoom tonight. So I'm going to call on you guys. Whoever has their hand up first in Zoom is going to be the first person who gets called on. So be prepared to raise your hand a lot tonight. And there is also a keyboard shortcut for raise hand. which is I thought there was a keyboard shortcut for raise hand, but now I can't even find raise hand, and it might be because I am host. Well, let me see if I can find that. While I'm looking that up, Shantina, go ahead.
When I attempt to join the session via GitHub, I get auth token returned by GitHub providers empty.
If you quit VS Code and close out whatever tab you had open GitHub in, if you reopen VS Code, see if that resets your like auth flow.
Close VS Code, close VS Code, close GitHub, and then reopen VS Code.
Correct. And make
Okay.
sure that when you close VS Code, you do like a command Q to fully quit it as opposed to just closing the window.
Thank you.
The raise hand keyboard shortcut is option Y,
Option Y.
which is a great why is it like that? Okay, so everyone can practice raising and lowering their hands, and we're going to be using Zoom as our kind of our buzzer to say who comes in first. Okay. So we are going to start with, let me close this out. So the first question for the night. Oh, Christy, did you have a question before we got started?
I was raising my hand.
Oh, okay. All right, so starting fresh, who can write 3 variables for us using const, let, and var? And this is a 1-pointer. Larry, go for it.
Okay.
Doing that, I'm just gonna move this scoreboard off screen.
5. Oh. Let's your you said const, let, and var, and then var there equals 9.
And just check what's your error on that.
There var equals 9. Oh, I missed the S.
Mm-hmm.
Split keyboard.
Definitely an adjustment. Okay, awesome. 1 point to Larry. Next question. Who can tell me the difference between those 3? Doug, go for it.
So I know const is, you can't change it once you declare it. Let, you can change it after you declare it. And var, I know you can change it, but does it also have some like different scope?
Yeah, so var is basically scopeless in that when you declare it, if you try to access that variable in other files, it's at a global scope, so you can access it everywhere. If that is confusing, if you don't have your head wrapped around scope, that's completely fine. Just know that let and const are the newer variable types and the preferred ones. So you can almost always tell an older code base in JavaScript because they're still using var instead of let and const. The reason why we would prefer a let over a var is that sometimes when we have a lot of variables across a lot of different files, we can actually start editing a variable that we didn't mean to because it's in another file. So by using that let, you're scoping it down to the file, the file itself that you're in, and so that is the preference. So 1 point to Doug. Okay. Next question. Who can identify, and this is a 2-pointer, who can identify every basic data type in JavaScript? Larry, go for it.
String.
Okay, so how do we write a
Object.
string?
Oh, we gotta write it.
Well, yeah, you want to write it, or you put the quotes and then
Quotes,
put
okay.
something between the quotes. And then, yeah, object, curly braces, and then you can put like a key value pair.
Okay,
Array. And that's with open and close brackets and some stuff inside if you want to put it. And a number. Now, one thing I'm kind of unsure about is if I know there's like integers and then there's floating point numbers. I don't know, I don't know if those are like actual types, though. I know number is a type though, so.
JavaScript considers that all a number, so the JavaScript
All right,
number
that's what I-
uses decimals and floats and all of that. You can get
That's what I
into
thought.
some diciness around, like there's something called big int, or big, I'm pretty sure it's big int, but for the most part, JavaScript is a little unique in that all numbers are considered equal. They aren't different types for integer and floating point, or what's the decimal, or there's another
Double.
one I'm thinking of.
Double.
Double, that's what I
Double.
was thinking of, yeah.
right,
But in
that's what I thought.
JavaScript, they're all a number. What is the one that you're missing?
Oh shit, Boolean,
And what's the Boolean?
true or false?
Okay, so we've got basic variables. We've got our data types.
Is that all of them?
That I know off the top of my head, yes. Okay. Any questions on that? At any point, if you guys have questions, feel free to ask. Does any of this syntax not look familiar to you? Doug, go ahead.
No, my key command wasn't working and I was just trying it out again. Now it works.
Gotcha. Okay, so strings we use whenever we want to store a value of characters. Strings always have double quotes, single quotes, or we're going to get to a template literal in 1 second. The key value pairs are used so that we can store some data associated with each other. Numbers are pretty straightforward. They can be numbers, they can be decimals, they can be positive and negative. Our Boolean is either going to be true or false. And then finally, we have our array, which is a list of any other data type in it. What is the difference between cat and string for 1 point? Doug, go ahead.
Cat is a string and string is a variable.
A variable that is also a string. So what
Sorry,
happens?
it's up above.
Yep. So what happens here is our array, if we did a console.log ARR here, let's actually do that. What we will find, oh, wrong one. Is that when we look at this, 1, true, and cat all come out because those are all values, right? And we see 1, true, and cat down here. But when we put string in here, because it is a variable name up here, when the computer goes to execute it, it's going to be pulling my string into that array instead. Okay,
And
Larry, you are, I'm sorry, Doug, you are now knocked out of asking questions because you two are in the lead. So you are temporarily barred from answering any questions.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it, Christy.
Is the array considered an undefined value?
No, because the array is defined right here as these 4 values.
Values,
In
okay.
order to have something that would be undefined, we could say something like let my new var. And we don't define a new value for it. We basically don't set it equal to anything. And so if we look at what my new var is in our console, we see that it's undefined.
Okay.
So whenever we don't set a value to a new variable, that is considered undefined. However, if we come down here and say my new var is equal to 5, this is undefined up until this point, and then at this point, because it has a value, it is no longer considered undefined.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to a fancier type of string. Who can write a template literal for me that uses the string variable that already exists for 2 points? What's a template literal?
Only thing that comes to mind when you say that to me is $ curly brace. But that might.
Nicole, you're up. Take a stab at it.
Okay. 1 second. You said using the stuff that's already on the screen?
Using the string const that's on line 10.
String const on line 10. Oh, I don't know. I'm gonna wing it.
Mhm.
String equals. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Can I do it like this? No, I don't know.
Yeah, you're on the right track. Keep going.
No, that's not right. 1 second.
So here, what we want to do is say something like we want to say something like,
Can I get a stab at it first?
Yeah,
No,
sure.
no, I'm not even finished.
All right.
talking.
But you're gonna tell the answer. Can I get a stab at it if you don't?
I guess I don't really. Yeah.
Let's try. Okay.
go ahead, Wayne.
Here we go. How you? Oh crap! I gotta go to VS Code. Sorry.
Values. Doesn't he have to use string?
You have to use string, but we're using string inside the template literal.
Wait.
Okay, so first thing, backticks. Backticks are what make a template literal. So that is what makes it different from a string, is that it's using backticks instead of single quotes or double quotes.
And it's on the outside and not in the inside. Is it?
Something like
So
that.
our backticks are used where the double quotes or single quotes would be, which are on the outside. So this is putting our value of the string in place. So if we console log the name, we are going to see my string comes out. But what's the point of a template literal? 2 points to Wayne, 1 point question right there. Why would we use a template literal? What's the point of that?
To use a variable
Yeah.
in to to use a variable in a variable. I don't know. So weird.
Mhm.
We not raising hands?
Scotty, go ahead.
No,
Is it? We use the template literal to define the string, right?
We do, but what's the point of using a template literal instead of a string?
I thought that was the answer. I don't know. Now I'll take a stab because we raising hands.
because it allows you to, we did this before, so it allows you to bring something over, from like, I don't know, I don't have the right words, but it allows you to bring something. It almost reminds me of like how we do with the links. Like it allows you to reuse and pull some information. But I don't know where you're pulling it from, so I don't know that word.
Nicole, take a stab at it.
I thought I had it, but I was gonna say it allows you to use it multiple places. Like if I wanted to take that, could I use that in multiple different lines, just like the template literal itself? I don't know.
You could. So the point of the let's ask this question instead. What is an alternative to using a template literal? Okay, so here, the point of the template literal is to say something like the type of my animal is a, and in here, I can put whatever variable I want and have it put the value of that variable into my overall string. So I could say ARR2, and now when I console log out my name, I'm going to get cat.
I should have this memorized.
So the point of the template literal is that whenever you see the $ curly braces, it's going to pause the execution of the string and say, hey, they don't actually want the words ARR2 here. We're going to pause. We're going to figure out whatever is between these curly braces, and we're going to drop it into the string. So the alternative to this would be, we could say the type of my animal is a, and then do a plus and say our variable. What is this plus operator called? For 1 point. What are we doing here? We're taking this string and shoving it against this string. Larry, what is that called?
Yeah.
Concatenation.
Concatenation. Christy, you said it as well, so I'm giving you a point.
Finally a point.
I'm sorry, Max, can you say the sentence again that you said about a template literal? You said it like pauses the string and then what?
Yeah, so it's saying, all right, I'm not going to actually put, this is all a string because it's not in the $ curly braces. But right here, whenever it hits the $ curly braces, it's going to go get the value of whatever is in between those curly braces. So it's going to go ARR. Okay, that's up here. Okay, number 2, index 2, this is 0, 1, and 2. So what they want is the word cat. So we take the word cat, we take out whatever the $ curly braces are, and we drop the word cat into it. The reason that we do that is because oftentimes we want to concatenate a bunch of things together. So it is common to do something like this and say, and my favorite Boolean value is, and then we would say something like bool, and then we have to do a plus and add a period. Okay, well now this gets really sloppy because look at how long this is wrapping, this is hard to read. So if we look at this, okay, now it's adding in this, it's putting all of it together for us, but that gets really ugly. So the point of the template literal is to say, hey, I can template out what I want my string to look like. And whenever I want a value to be dropped into that string, I'm able to do that.
Oh, it's kind of like a shortcut, basically.
It's definitely a shortcut, but this is much easier to read over this. So we basically are giving it the string that we want and then dropping in these template values to say, hey, I want to pause it and drop whatever the value is into that.
Are we only using temporary literals with strings?
Yes. The value output of a template literal is a string. And interestingly enough, these two are actually exactly the same to the computer. So if you do name is equal to name2, you're going to find okay, I thought that was going to work.
Would that be a question?
What about a double equal?
Well, they're both strings, so the double equal shouldn't make a difference. There we go. I missed a word or two. So if we do a triple equal there, now we got true. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, moving on. Who is daring enough for 2 points to map over my array using .map?
Hmm.
I'll try to let y'all raise your hand.
Anyone? It's okay if you don't get it. All right, Wayne, go for it. Map over my array and console log out every item in it using the map. You're muted, but
Nope, I wanted to stay unmuted, but okay, here we go. Okay. No, hold on.
so
Okay, okay, stand still.
okay, let's take a step back. What kind of data type do we need to use in order to use map?
You gotta set it somewhere, right?
Alert.
Christy, what did you say?
Oh, wait.
When
No.
what type of data do we map over?
Objects. No,
Parameters.
no.
Value pairs.
Array.
An
Array.
array. So what we need to do is we need to start with what array we are trying to map over. So we are going to say ARR, we want to map over
I
that.
was gonna do that down there, but I thought that I had the cons first, but no, crap.
Okay, now when we map over everything, what's the value that the map gives us access to?
The index and value.
the value, and it also does give us the index. Okay, now that the map is going over the array and dumping each individual value in here. So what we are able to do is say, okay, now what do we want each iteration, each value to do? We want it to console log out a template literal and say in the index, the value is value.
But
Okay. So when we're in here, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, the first time, oh, I can run it before I. Now, if I say node playground, in the index 0, the value is 1. In index 1, the value is true. In index 2, the value is cat. Okay, how is that happening? Every time we loop over an item in the array up here,
mhm.
that value, come on, that value gets dropped into the value down here. Then we console log it and it goes template literal, oh, index. Where is index coming from? It's coming from index here because we're looping over the array here. So when we go up to here, we know that's an index 0. Indexes always start with 0. Then it stops using the template literal. It goes back and it goes, okay, string, string, string. Oh, $sign curly brace. What is this value? This value is coming from here, which is coming from up here. Then it console logs it out, but it's not done because we map over the whole array. So it repeats, comes up here for the true, and starts dropping those values into our template literal while it console logs it all out. Wayne, go ahead.
No, I get that. It's just that I thought I had to make a variable first before I did that, but no. Yeah, it was already there. I should have just did that.
Nicole, you have a question?
Question. Before we got to map, because I feel like, I don't know, I may be wrong, but I feel like map is more recent. Was there something else that we were looping over? Like,
There
what
sure was.
Right.
And I'm gonna answer Zach's question, and then we're gonna open a new question up for your question.
Okay.
Zach, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what's getting put into the index and what's getting put into the value? Are they both getting pulled from the array?
They're both getting pulled from the array. So map automatically feeds whatever is in the first parameter into the value, and whatever the second parameter is into index. So we can actually call those anything that we want. We don't have to say value and index. So we could be like, we could do something as silly as your mama. And as long as we are consistent here, that would do the same exact thing. So when we reread that or rerun that, it drops in the same exact values. So this is only based off of the first and second, whatever's in the first slot is always going to be in the value. Whatever is in the second slot is always going to be an index.
Okay. So the way you have it now, it would come out as saying in the index cat, the value is 1.
Yeah. In the index 0, it is 1. In 1, it's true. In 2, it's cat.
Oh, so it logs out like all possible.
It's a loop over every item in the array. That's all that a map is it loops over every item in the array. Speaking of loops, for 1.5, who can write another type of loop other than Larry and Doug that would loop over and console log out every value in the array?
Hmm.
What, let's just get that's the maybe an easier question. What keyword do we use to loop over something?
If statement, is it?
If statements are conditional statements, what keyword do we use to loop over things?
For yeah,
Or Tiffany, do you want to take a stab at it?
not ifs.
Oh my, wait, no, I was literally just answering your question.
Okay, so let's keep it going. What does the for loop do? It gives you access to each item in the array. Just like when we map over the array, we get access to each value in the array. So what do we need to do when we loop over each item in a for of loop?
For
What's the question again? I'm sorry.
How do we write a for loop that will loop over each item in our array and print it out
Each item in the array. Print it out.
using a for loop?
there's three conditions, so for loops.
Can we use the internet or no? Because if not, I'm never gonna know.
Yeah, you can Google questions. I'm
Okay.
gonna start. I'm gonna.
Wait,
start
why you ain't
talking
say that
to
from the
people
beginning?
that's
I'd have been answering questions.
Is this the one? I was gonna say, is this the one where you do like the plus? Where you do a plus?
So I'm thinking of a for of loop. So you don't need the plus for a for of loop.
Okay.
So if anyone wants to Google for of loop and get an easy 2 points for a for loop, you're totally welcome to right now.
It says a variable of iterable. I don't know.
Uh-huh. So how would we write that?
So
Oh, okay. I'm gonna do it.
You're gonna do it, Nicole?
Yeah, let me try.
Go for it.
if she doesn't, I'll go next.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know if I'm doing this right. And I'm using, which one am I using at the top again?
You're using ARR.
Oh. I'm gonna get this wrong. Ugh.
You're off to the right start.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what that word's supposed to be, but
Oh.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
you're on the right track. We called it value up in our ARR.map, so we can do the same thing. And then what are you looping over?
were we calling it index?
Or what are we looping over? What's the list of all of our data? Yep. Okay. Now, how do we tell it to do something each time we loop over the array? Yep. Okay. And now what did we want to do? We wanted to console log, right? For each value. And then how do we get it to log out the value?
Console. All right. Let me just read this myself. For value of. Well, wait, what was the question again?
How do we make it log out every value in the array?
Oh, I don't remember the rest of that.
All we need to do is paste
Wow.
in the value.
You spell value wrong.
Oh, I thought it was gonna be like 0,
Yeah, or
1, comma 2, comma 3.
That is, so let's review this one first. A for of loop loops over every item in the array. So it says ARR is this array up here. When this loop first runs, it's going to take whatever is in the first index, the first value in the array, and drop it into the word value.
Mhm.
Then it comes into the for loop and it says, okay, what's going on with this console log? Take the value and drop it into here. So what's going to come out is 1. Because 1 is the first value in here. Now it hits this curly brace down here and says, oh, I'm not done. I'm going to come back up here. What's the next value? It's true. True gets dumped in here and then console logs it out. That's why we have true here. Okay, now it comes in and it says, what's next? It gets the cat. It drops cat into the value and it console logs it out. Christy, what you were asking about is a different kind of for loop. You are asking about a for loop that uses an iterator.
Uh,
And that one.
so would it bring, it would give, it would, that's how we would get the same thing?
Exact same thing.
Okay.
So, Max, what's the difference between Nicole using let as opposed to const in her condition?
In this case, it is, I think,
No, not that one, the one Nicole did.
yeah, so the difference here,
Get rid of your other one.
this is allowed, this is completely fine to use because every time this loop runs, it basically clears out whatever the previous value was and reinitializes the variable. That's how the for of loop works behind the scenes. However, in
Right.
this for loop, I isn't initialized a second time. It has one added to it. So that's why this errors out, because the loop's actually going to run the first time, and then it can't add 1 to the I. So because it's a
Right.
constant. So that's why this errors. Compared to this behind the scenes, you could use a let or a const here because the variable is reinitialized. What you couldn't do is then modify the value in here to something else. So if we run that, we're also going to get an error assignment to a constant variable. So if you're looping over something and you're not modifying the value, it's better to use a const. If you are modifying that value, it's better to use a let here.
Thank you.
Can I get a 0.5? Like, can I get a
I'll give you a point on that. You got most of the way there. Okay. How are we feeling about loops? 3 different kinds of loops here. We used a map, we used a for let, and we used a for I, which is an iterator.
I have a question.
Yep.
So, okay, so I know that those 2 in the front are kind of more like beginner, and then like the map is probably like next after that. What would be the best, like, what would be the best time to use these?
Subjective question. I always like a for of unless what I am returning is a new array, and then I use it in array.map. So whenever you're iterating over an array to make a new array, I use a map. Whenever I just want to loop over things in general, I use a for of loop. I would only ever use this loop if for some reason I needed to like get every other item in the list, or if I needed to control how I was incrementing the loop. But whenever I'm looping over each value in an array, I'm always going to use a for of unless I am returning a new array of things, and then I use an array.map. So a good example of this would say, let's say that I modify my array to be of objects. And I say, hey, my first object is going to have a make of Toyota. and model of Camry, and then make of Tesla, and the model of Y. So let's say I want to log out all of my, I want a new array of all of my manufacturers. I'm able to use a map here to say, hey, all of my makes, we're going to get the make of every object in the array. So we're going to say ARR object dot map. That's going to give me each individual car in that array. And what I want to do is return the car dot make. So now when I console log out my makes, I'm going to get Toyota and Tesla in a new array. So whenever I'm trying to generate a new array, whatever gets returned in here is going to be the value in the new array. So the first time this array runs, it's going to give me the car. What's the car? The car is this whole object right here. So I get access to this object here, and then I say, what property, what key do I want from that object? I want the make. So now the first time this loop runs, the make is Toyota. So it's going to return that and stick that into my array for me. Now it's going to run a second time. What's my car now? The second time the car runs, it is my Tesla Model Y. So I say, okay, what am I returning? I'm returning the make. The make is Tesla, so it drops it into my array. Now it says there is nothing else left in that array. So I'm going to take whatever we generated and store it into makes. And I'm going to name my variable with an S because it's a list that contains multiple mates. So what I was able to do is simplify my array. Instead of having all of these objects, I'm able to loop over it and get all of the makes out. Now I can accomplish that same exact thing by saying let makes equal a new array for const car of ARR obj makes 2.push the car.make, and then console log out my makes 2. Same exact thing.
The first one stuck, but that one didn't.
Okay, so, but it's important that it does. So we'll say, look, we're going to make a new empty array. There's nothing in it yet. Then we are going to loop over our ARR object. Okay, that's this up here. Okay, now what are we going to do each time we loop over it? We're going to get this object. This object is now in car. Now, what do we want to do? Makes 2. Okay, that's my empty array. What does push do? It adds something on at the end of the array. What do we want to push on? We want to push the car.make. What's our car? Again, that's our object up here, but because we're looping over it, it's just the object. It's not the whole array. What do we want to get out of it? The make. So we come down here and we push that into the array. So now the first time this loop runs, makes 2 just has Toyota in it. Now car has our whole object in it, which is our Tesla. So it drops it in, it gets the make out of the object and adds that to the end of the array. So now our array has the Toyota and the Tesla. It comes up here, it says there are no more objects left in this array. And so it comes down, finishes the loop, and then prints out everything we added to the array.
Okay, got it.
Any questions on any of that? Now, this is something we haven't covered at all and open to everyone. Who would like to write a filter that is going to print out all of the Tesla cars. Before that, go Google your documentation. Go do a Google search for array, JavaScript, filter. Go pull up W3 schools, go pull up MDN. Everyone do that right now. Get good at reading your documentation. Look at the filter, understand what the filter is trying to tell you. Look at the example code. Everyone spend a minute looking at the example code. And the problem that I'm giving you guys is filter through the array object to print out all the cars where the make is Tesla.
Yeah, sorry.
The 3-pointer. Scotty, Shantina, Stephanie, Tiffany, Zach, you all have priority on answering this question. Let's get you guys on the board. Zach, you want to go for it?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot.
Go ahead. You can do it right here, so you can just reference it up on 25. So we want to be using the filter function. So filter works just like our map in that we do ARR obj dot filter. So let me get you started and see if that, I'm going to say ARR obj dot filter, and we're going to console log out the whole thing. And then when we filter through something, we get access to the car. So see if that gets you started.
Console log is spelled wrong, or console is spelled wrong.
Thank you. So the filter that we want to be looking at, I just do JavaScript, array, filter. First thing that's going to come up is MDM. Second one is W3 schools. I like W3 schools a little bit more because it's a little more simple. So what it does is this filter, we take the array, we call dot filter on the array. Check adult is coming down here and giving us access to the age. What it's saying here is return if the age is greater than or equal to 18, then return true, which means it's going to stay in the array. So when this is done running, our array is going to be 32, 33, and 40. It's not going to have the 16 in it anymore. What I did is I combined these two together. I said, hey, we don't need an entirely separate function. We can get access to the age right inside of here. So now whatever is inside of this function can go right inside of our filter here. So I can say return if the age is equal to 32. And now when we run it, you'll see 32 is the only value showing up here.
Max, it says it doesn't change the values in the original array.
Correct. It returns an entirely new array.
Okay.
So yeah, the only thing that you're missing, did you do this, Zach, while I wasn't looking? Okay, the only thing you're missing is where does the make come from? Close. What is, if we give it, there you go. If we give it the whole array object, it's like, well, what car do you want the make from? So we are filtering through all of this. So now I'm just going to take this code and move it to the bottom. So it's at the bottom of the output. When we run this, I broke something. Oh, this is. When I run that, now I get only the Tesla models in my array.
Does that say sexy?
The Tesla models.
S3XY.
He wanted to call the Model 3 the Model E because it was like their smaller, cheaper economy car. And he got sued by Ford because they already had like the Model E trademarked for electric. And so he said, screw it, I'll call it the 3 instead because it was the third car they made. But after he did it, he went, our product line is now complete, or we have the sexiest product line on the market because it's the S3XY. Okay, how are we feeling about this filter?
Good to know, because I don't remember doing that one before.
No, I don't think we covered filter before. But do you see how it's kind of similar to the map here? Right? The map is generating out a new array for us. This is just filtering the array down to the models that we care about. And ready for a real mind blower? We can actually chain them together. And if we only wanted the Tesla models, we can filter by the car and then map over the filtered results and return only the car model. So now we've got a new array of those models. Two points, 3 points to Zach. What did I say? 2 points. You are on the right track. All right, how are we feeling in general here? You ready to move on to the next concept? Anything on this screen that you would like to re-review before we keep going? Okay. For 2 points, and this question is going out to Scotty, Shantina, Stephanie, and Tiffany. And Shranjay, because I don't have you on the list and now you're getting added. Okay. Scotty, Shantina, Stephanie, Shranjay, or Tiffany, I would like you to write a function for 1 point. Any function. Can do anything whatsoever, just write a function. The prize is not a new Tesla. Function can do anything, I just need a function. Tiffany, go for it. We're down at, yeah. Down at 68 or 69, doesn't matter.
Am I like console.log it also, or?
I just need a function, doesn't need to do
Okay.
anything. So that's a variable, I need a function.
I forgot what's the difference.
You want to Google it, you're welcome to.
Okay.
Do JavaScript function.
Okay.
I think there's a
Okay.
Function my favorite.
Oh, okay, okay. So I can do. Oh, oops. Um, no, it's the next part. Hold on. And then, let's see. Is that right?
On the right track. The only
I
thing
know.
that you're missing up here is you've got some parameters in here that we don't need.
Oh, okay.
That is definitely on the right track. 2 points, Tiffany. So Gotti, Shantina, Stephanie, or Sranjay, all the S's. How do we call that function? Or execute that function?
On to you.
Stephanie, go for it.
You can get it. I mean, I'll make some spaghetti. You have wings?
On the right track, Stephanie. What do we add to the name of to the end of the name of the function in order to execute it or run it? You got to put something in right here to actually execute it or run it. Or parentheses. So whenever we add parentheses at the end of the function, that's what's telling it to actually execute. So otherwise, if we console log this, it's gonna say, yeah, my favorite number is a function. That's all. Well, where's my 2 times 3? Where's my 6? We're not telling it to actually run my favorite number and the code inside of it. We're just telling it to console log it. So what we do instead is when we put the parentheses, it's going, oh, you don't want me to just log out the function. You want me to actually run the code inside of the function. So now when we run it, we get our 6 because what is the output of this function? The output is returning 2 times 6 and giving us the number.
Now, did she actually have to console log it since she was just asking her to call it, or did she have to console log it?
Technically, you could call it without console logging it, but you wouldn't see the output. So if we took this, this is technically running, even though we don't see the 6, this is calling the function. So
Gotcha.
to your question, yes, that is technically calling the function. And
But
there
in
are
order to-
times that we wouldn't need to console log it out. Like if we were doing inner HTML update or something like that.
Okay.
Good work. Stephanie, you're on the board. Okay. Scotty, Shantina, Sranjay, can you write that same my favorite number function with an arrow function instead? So feel free to Google JavaScript arrow function.
What's the question? Sorry.
Can you write my favorite number function using an arrow function instead of the explicit function keyword?
Oh, yeah.
So remember, our arrow function is equal, greater than sign.
Yes.
Scotty, go for it. And just call it my favorite number 2, so it doesn't clash with the other function. Yep. Beautiful. That may work, but whenever we work with the function, we're always going to have those curly braces. So this is on the same track as this one. This time we just got fancy. Point for anyone. What are these called up here? The A and the B.
Parameters.
Parameters. And what are they called when I do something like
Argument.
you mean to the punch? 5 and 6, those are now arguments. Whenever we call a function, whatever we pass into that function is called an argument that gets passed into the parameters up here. So now when we run this code, we are going to get our 30 coming out. This is the older style of writing functions. This is the newer style of writing functions. And in fact, we've already used this style of writing functions because if you look at our filter is taking a function up there. That function is taking the parameter of the car and returning out what we're using. Christy, did you have a question?
When you're explaining and you highlight like that, and then you go click on something, it's hard for me to see like what you clicking on when you explaining, by the way.
This is because someone else highlighted it. And so I don't know that I can unhighlight, like, I don't know that I can disable showing other people's highlights.
Okay, no problem.
I'll see if I can do that in the settings during break. So we use another arrow function right here. These two are essentially equivalent. This is the older way of writing functions. This is the newer way of writing functions. Shantina or Stranjay, why do we use functions?
Wait, so can I get my half a point?
Oh, no, you already did. You're on the board.
Oh, okay, good.
Shantina or Stranjay, you don't have to write any code. Why do we use a function?
What was your question again, Max? Because my computer was breaking.
Why do we use functions?
Okay, I want to answer, well, from what I was just looking at, to minimize basically, well, because you said, why do we use the arrow functions or why do we use functions?
Why do we use functions in general? Whether it's a explicitly named function, whether it's an arrow function, why do we use functions in general? Sanjay, you're muted. You're muted again. I don't know if you're talking. Okay, opening the question up to anyone. Why do we use functions?
Execute a command of some
To
sort.
execute a command, but what's their primary use? How does it help our code to write functions?
So
Stephanie,
you
go ahead.
can,
Does
Um,
minimize-
pause it.
So you can use it over and over again?
Bingo, that is the primary reason we write a function. So if we wanted to filter all of our cars by Tesla, and then we wanted to filter all of the Toyotas, and then we wanted all of the Hondas, now that works. We get our arrays grouped by Tesla, Toyota, and Honda, but that is a lot of repeated code. Wouldn't it be nice if we could do something like const filter cars is going to take the make and is going to return our filter? So now we use our parameter and we compare that to the object car make. So we're able to simplify this down into a console.log filter cars by Toyota, Camry, or Toyota and Tesla. And when we run that code, we have now simplified this down because we've made the filter cars a function that is now reusable.
Stephanie, get your point.
Definitely, Stephanie, your point on the board.
Yay.
Okay, how are we feeling? Feeling like this is a review, feeling like we really hate JavaScript, we feeling bored out of our minds.
Like review.
Okay, I am going to take us over the finish line here with spread operators and default arguments and destructuring. So destructuring, if we've got our array up here at the top, and what we would like to do is, let's say we've got our const and we're going to call it obj2, and we've got the make of a Tesla and a model of the Y. What I can do is, of course, I can say let obj2 dot make and get out oops, forgot my string, and get out my Tesla here. But let's say that I've got a bunch of other properties like the year and the miles and I don't know, the color. Well, now if I just want the make and the model out, it's a lot to say obj2.make.model and list all of that out. Wouldn't it be nice if I could say, hey, give me the make and model using the object? So now I can say make and model and get access to it directly this way. So what we do is we destructure this object. We take the structure of the object and extract out the make using the make key here and the model using the model key here. So now my make and model here line up with this Tesla and the Y without me having to use obj2 when I log in.
Oh,
Doug, go ahead.
Is that what we're doing in React when we do import and we do brackets from something? Are those like properties of the thing that we're saying from?
Yeah, because on W3 schools, it's not in JavaScript, it's in React.
So this is how useState works under the hood. Obviously, it does a lot more than console logging the state value, but what we're able to do is say const value and set value is equal to our useState function. So what it's doing is this is using array destructuring, not object destructuring, but it's saying based off of whatever the first value is that comes out of the useState function, store that in value, and then take whatever the second item is in that return and set it in set value. So we can console.log here the value and the set value. And when we execute that here, we can see my state because I set that here, and that the set state func is a function that I did right here. So you could even do, if you called set value, it would give you, ooh, interesting. I was not expecting it to give me undefined. I was expecting to give me, oh, I called it and then I console logged it.
You have to call. You have to make a call when you use useState.
Yes, because useState is a function that array gives you. That React gives you. I'm sorry. React gives you a function called useState that returns out the value in the set value as an array. So that gives you the array destructuring.
I get it.
That answer your question, Doug?
Yes, well, it actually clarified it for me because I was thinking, I was wondering about, so that was some new illumination. Sorry, I have too many screens here. I was just like, when we do an import, so is that, or is that
also destructuring? When you import React, it is giving you access to an object which has all of those functions as the keys. And so the value is the function itself. And so what we do is we pull out the keys from React to destructure that into useEffect, useState, and useRef.
okay? So that is another form of destructuring.
Yes.
Thank you.
You could you can also do this as import React from React, and then you could do something like that's also completely valid.
Okay,
Why does it got the squigglies under it though?
Because we're doing an import and it doesn't like that I'm in a generic JavaScript file. But if you were in React, that would, because basically React is an object, and then inside that object, it has a key called useState, and then the value is the function itself. Okay. So we've also got something called a spread operator. So let's say I have my my array. And I would like to make a copy of this array. What I am able to do is say const copy equals and use a spread of my cards. So when I console log this, I now have a my Tesla, Honda, Toyota. Well, what's the point of the ... I'm literally taking the array and spreading out all of the values into my new array. If I don't have the ... what I'm essentially doing is taking this array, my Tesla, Honda, Toyota, and putting it in a new array. So now I've got an array inside an array. That's not what I want. What I want to do is take Tesla, Honda, and Toyota and spread them out into my new array. So if I do the ... I'm effectively taking everything and spreading it into the new one. And we can even get fancy and use our spread operator combined with our destructuring. So we can say ... rest of info. And if I console log out the rest of my info up here, you can see I get my Tesla and my Y, and the rest of the data gets dumped in an object.
Can you scroll up in the console a little bit or terminal a little bit?
Is that enough?
Yeah,
In the live share, you should be able to see my terminal as well and be able to scroll up yourself.
oh, okay.
Doug, do you still have a question, or is that a lingering hand raise?
Lingering.
Zach, go ahead.
So is rest of info something you defined, or is that something it recognizes?
It's just the ... that's telling it, hey, whatever was not destructured from the make and model, put it in here. So I can say like other car info, and as long as I'm consistent with that here, you still get, you still get the exact same output right here.
Oh, like colors.
And I can even go in and say, oh, go get the miles from here, because that's just an object.
So I have a question.
Mhm.
You might already explain this, but when you do like other car info, or you don't have to define those, right? Like you don't have to do like const.
No, well, you're doing the const right here, which is what's declaring them.
And that's what the curly brackets is for then.
The curly brackets is the destructuring idea of, let me take my obj2 and destructure it. Let me pull apart different pieces of the structure of it and put it into these new variables.
Okay, I didn't see that before. Well, I seen it, but I forgot it was there. So okay, I see now.
Doug, go ahead.
Could you rename it? Like if you wanted to call make something else, can you?
You
in
cannot.
Can you say like make as the make, or?
No, when you destructure, it needs to match. It needs to match here.
Okay.
I do not think you can alias destructure JavaScript. Oh, I didn't know you could do that. Yes, apparently you can do that. You can say, I no longer want it to be called make. I want it to be called manufacturer, and use manufacturer down here. Did not know you could do that. Have never done that before. But apparently you can destructure with a new name. What do they call that?
Okay, so the new name comes after the
Yeah.
property name.
This is called aliasing. So that is object destructuring and then using an alias while you're destructuring the object. Okay, last thing I want to cover before we go on break is in ES6, there is a new ability when we make myfunc3 to have a default property. So we'll say mynum1, mynum2, and it's going to return mynum1 plus mynum2. Well, we've already seen when we call this myfunc3, we can pass in 1 and 2, and it will automatically output 3. But let's say there are times where if mynum1 or mynum2 isn't passed in, we want it to default to a value. Let's say 5 and 10. Well, when we call this again, it's going to do the exact same thing because it ignores the default values because we are passing in 1 and 2 here. But if we call this function and forget to pass anything in, we're going to get 15. Or we could call this function again and only pass in the first number, and then we get 20. Well, why do we get 20? Because we passed in the 10, it ignores this default value of the 5 and uses my 10 instead. But my num2 doesn't exist. I didn't pass anything in here. So because of that, my num2 defaults to 10. We take the 10 that I passed in, ignore the default 5, take the 10 that I forgot to pass in down here, that's the my num2, and then we get 10 and 10 together.
Wait, why is it ignoring the default 5?
Because I passed in the 10 right here.
And you said this is new?
This is all ES6. So this
Okay.
is new to JavaScript, and the reason why I'm spending so much time on it is I want to make sure when you go into interviews, interviewers love to ask you ES6 questions. And the reason they do that is they want to make sure that you're staying current. So you may get into a whiteboarding interview and they say, given this data, make it show up on the page and use the map function in order to do that. And so what they're really testing you on is, hey, do you not only know JavaScript, but do you know the latest features that just came out with JavaScript? So they may say to you, hey, filter through this data and then make it show up on a page. That would be a whiteboard interview where they're requiring you to use ES6. So that's why I put that list into the outline tonight, is so that you can review those principles.
How do we know, like, I don't know, from a year from now, how do we know to check for new things? Like, how do we know?
You get into like communities in Slack where they're like, hey, ES7 just came out. Is anyone using these new features? Or you're working in a team and you look at someone else's code and you're like, what the heck are these curly braces on the left side of the code? Like, I don't know what that is. And so you go look at who wrote that code and you're like, hey, I don't really know what this is called. Can you tell me what this is? And they go, oh, that's object destructuring. So you go over to MDN and you Google it and you're like, oh, hey, cool, thanks, new feature. I'm going to start using that.
They should send out a newsletter.
Oh, I'm sure you can sign up for them. Or you follow Wes Boss on his Medium blog or his Twitter and he posts something out. Hey, I'm making a new class for, ES6. In fact, I would not be surprised if you go to his site and look at his courses, ES6 for everyone. And if you go look at that, I think posts his curriculum. Yep. So arrow functions, we just went over that. Template strings or template literals, we just went over that. Destructuring, we just went over that. Iterables and looping, okay, that was .map and .filter. And then an array of array improvements. Hey, I like him, he's quite punny. But he's going to go into some additional things here. We just covered the for of loop and the for of with objects. Now he's showing you how to use the .find and the every. Okay, here's the spread operators that we just covered. And a whole bunch of additional things right on top of that. So this is a great course if you're looking to further your JavaScript knowledge. You are welcome to check this out. I know this is pricey. However, this does go on sale for Black Friday and a couple other holidays. And if you sign up for his newsletter, I bet you he has one. He's got a podcast that you can follow. And he's also on Twitter, so you can follow him there as well. Pretty sure he has a newsletter too, but I'm not sure where it is.
What was that first thing you were showing us with those videos?
That was ES6 for everyone.
Oh, I bought the JavaScript.
So this is specifically what we covered tonight.
The best way to learn modern JavaScript. Okay.
Zach, go ahead with your question. Sorry, I've been.
He don't got like a bundle. Like if I wanted to buy everything, like he don't got like a bundle.
You probably don't want everything. He's got a bunch of courses that you probably don't need. But definitely follow his definitely follow his Twitter, because he'll tweet out like coupon codes for programs and let you know when things go on sale. And he's a really good guy in terms of, he was offering like discounted programs to people who couldn't afford them. And people like tweeted at him and said like, hey, I'm in this situation, I can't afford it, but I would really like your course. And he just came back and was like, nah, I can't discount that for you. I'm just going to give it to people, because like, if you can write out your need for this course, like, and ask for help, how am I going to like turn around and try and profit off of you? So he gives out a lot of courses for free for like people in third world countries. And he's just a really good guy, and I think a great teacher. Zach, I'm sorry, go ahead.
In my function 3, if we add a third value, does it ignore the third value or does it add all three together?
It will ignore the third value, because while you can pass additional arguments, because they are not parameters, they will be ignored. Okay, the only thing that I didn't get to cover on ES6 was promises. I would recommend that if you're curious about promises, that's async, await, and .then. I would recommend finding some additional resources for them. And I will also link to the Wes Boss course that I mentioned if you are interested in getting more practice with ES6. Any questions before we go on break? You feeling like if you got into an interview and were asked to use a dot filter, you would be able to do it? Are you feeling like if you were asked to write a new function, you'd be able to do it? That's what we want to practice with. Okay, let's go on break and be back at 7:35. Time during break to let everything soak in. Scroll through that file in the live share. Is there anything in those 124 lines that you would like to review? Anyone have questions? Anything that we already covered on the outline for tonight? It can be any JavaScript concepts that you feel like you're struggling with.
So this is JavaScript, and the React, basically after what we learned after that is kind of more React stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
No questions? Okay. So a couple things that I want to test to just mention, and don't have slides for this in particular or anything, but they come up during interviews a lot, and so I wanted to kind of just touch on all of these key terms so that you're familiar with them. With that said, does anyone know what REST is or want to take a stab at what REST is? Or know what it stands for?
Representational states.
Representative state transfer.
Transfer.
What is, yes, what is REST used for? Where have we used REST?
Crud, create, read, update, delete.
We do, more broadly though, how does REST apply to our create, read, updates, and deletes?
It's able to record the state of the app. So if we refresh the browser, we still have our stuff.
Yeah, so think about this as our rec res almost. Representative state transfer is saying that our API is one way. Our API can't actually send data to the front end until the front end requests that data. So using REST is the model of a request and a response, in that the front end makes a request, it goes to the back end, and it is transferring the state that it is trying to represent. Representative state transfer, right? So it is basically saying, hey, the person is on the blog page and I need to go get the posts. And so the back end goes, oh, okay, goes and does whatever. What the back end does isn't part of REST itself, the database call or the endpoint or the math or any of that. But once it gets down into the res, once it sends data back to the front end receives that. That is REST, in that the back end now can't say, oh, we've got a new blog post, hey, front end, can't do that. The front end needs to open a request, get the data from the back end, then deal with it on the front end. So the model of REST is basically saying that the server cannot keep a connection open. It cannot keep a connection alive. What it can do is only respond to requests. And because of that, you may need to include some additional information like a cookie, so that every time something gets sent to the back end, we're able to pull the user session and get that information out. So REST is the way that most of the internet works. Whenever you go to any website, when you go to NewYorkTimes.com or Google.com or whatever site you're going to, it goes to the New York Times. The New York Times server tells you, here's the web page that you're going to show. The front end shows that, and that connection is closed. There is no lingering connection to the backend server. The backend server cannot send new information unless that a new request comes in from the front end. That is how REST works and how the vast majority of the internet works. With that said, does anyone know the newer connection type that does allow a connection to stay open?
Is it in an outline?
It is.
Oh, MVC.
So
Oh. It's saying
It is sockets. So an open socket connection works entirely different from REST. It's an entirely different idea. The socket, when the page first loads, it opens a socket connection to the server. Now that that connection is live, the socket can transmit data from the front end to the back end, or the back end can broadcast information back to the front end. So sockets are used in any kind of real-time app. So Google Docs itself uses sockets. When I'm typing letters, instead of making all these API calls and the server having to look up what document I'm on and remember my user every time I press a letter, instead it can do all of that work when the socket connection is open, and then just push that data to, can transmit that data to the server, and the server can broadcast that to other people who may have the document open. Zach, go ahead.
Does that not cause problems with like overloading people's RAM or like DDoS?
Sockets are definitely more memory intensive. And on top of that, they are more internet intensive, right? Because back in the day, you're on a dial-up internet connection, right? So you would dial into the internet, you would load your web page, but if your dial-up connection went down, you wouldn't want to lose the page that you were on. You would want to still be able to read it. And then only when you navigated to another page would you want to pull in more information from the internet. But now, because internet connections have gotten so much better, those sockets are much less intensive on the network to transmit that data through the system. So while we still design most APIs to this day using REST, sockets are definitely a newer technology that allow you to keep that line of information open.
Okay.
Great question. Doug, go ahead.
With the representational state transfer, is the state transfer when the back end sends something to the front end and
Round trip. So it is when the front end requests something and everything the back end needs to know is in that request, whether it's in the body of the request, whether it's in the headers, or whether it's in the cookie, which I think actually qualifies as the headers. So when we log in, right, the blog backend needs to know if you're logged in or not. If you're not logged in, it's not going to let you, make new posts. So every time the request gets made on the front end, we had to do that credentials include. So the fetch knew to include the cookie information that the backend used for the session to know that the user was signed in.
so the state is what the front end's passing to the back end and what the back end's passing to the front end.
Correct.
And what's the representational part?
It is representing the data that should be displayed on the front end.
Okay,
That might be.
I'm gonna say, is that a question, Max?
There is certainly a lot that can REST can be broken down into a very detailed breakout. And so all you need to know is that basically the REST is the model that the front end makes a request, the back end deals with it and sends it back in the response. And then the server completely forgets about that user until another request comes in. That's the very basics of REST. If you would like to do a deep dive on REST, I will post 2 links in the chat and add them.
Are you gonna put them on the outline or no?
Yes, I will also put them on the outline.
Thank you.
I particularly like the Code Academy one, and that will be a good review of everything. REST overview and REST deep dive spec. Any questions on REST and REST for sockets? Okay. One last thing I want to touch on there is, oh, I'm sorry, Zach, go ahead.
CRUD stands for create,
read, update, delete.
That's what I was forgetting. Thank you.
And read is kind of the easiest one to forget about, because of course, when you put information in the database, you want to read it. So I normally do the read first and get my read working with dummy data that I put in the database. And then I get my create working to make sure new things are showing up. Then I do my delete because it's easy to just say, do you want to delete this? Get rid of it. And then I do my update. Which is, okay, how do I do that flow? So not every single thing in your database needs a CRUD flow, but as a junior developer, I cannot tell you how many times I would ship out a new feature, add a new model to the database to get the create and the read working, and maybe even the update, and then have my boss come back to me and be like, so how do I get rid of this? It's like, oh, I forgot that you can't just go into the SQL database and hit the delete row. And so you got to figure out where in your interface you're going to put a delete button and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So CRUD is not a REST concept. However, it is something you use REST to achieve, if that makes sense. Christy, go ahead.
So when we were doing the passwords, that was REST. When we were
whenever we make a fetch call, we are using REST.
Vegetables. Okay. That's the example that they used on Code Academy. That's what I was.
So one thing to mention is you may see Ajax, AJAX. Ajax is basically the basic request that you make that fetch has largely replaced. So when you see very legacy old code, they may call it an Ajax request, but an Ajax request is basically just a fetch.
Okay.
And then the last thing I'll mention is we've been making our APIs and we're using REST and we're coming up with our own endpoints and we're figuring out what to pass in the body. But someone much smarter than me realized, like, hey, there's no standard here. There's no easy way for me to say, regardless of your data, here's what I would like to query your database for, and here's the format that I want to get those queries back in. So that is where GraphQL comes in, and GraphQL is just like SQL, structured or standardized query language for the database, except GraphQL is a standard used to make your API up to that standard, right? So that you would say, hey, anytime you want to access the user, here's how you would query the user, and here's the format that you would get it back in. So if you think about SQL as being a query language for the database, you can think of GraphQL as being a query language for your API. So it's a standard way of writing endpoints, querying those endpoints, and returning the data from them. And that is GraphQL. So it's certainly not a requirement to write your API using GraphQL, clearly, because you've all created your capstones without it. But it is a newer standard that the industry is moving towards. It doesn't have quite enough industry-wide adoption yet to incorporate it into our curriculum, but it's something that you should be aware of. Sound good? Okay. Talk to me about model view controller. There should be at least one word in there that's familiar. What is it?
Model.
Model. What did we use for our models? What's the name of the package we use for our models?
Sequelize.
Sequelize. Someone else. What is the point of using the model? What bridge does the model, what gap does the model bridge?
It, I don't know, exports.
Yeah, what are the two things that the model connects?
It connects the database to the backend.
To the backend, to our API, right? The point of the model is that we are telling our backend what the model of the table looks like in the database. And that's a two-way bridge, right? We can create new things in our backend code, and it will translate it into a SQL command. And we can do that in reverse. We can ask the database for some information in a query and have that returned out into an object for us. What class of code is Sequelize? What kind of tool is it?
It's a database tool.
It's
No.
a database tool, but it has a specific name.
Framework.
It is a
ORM.
It is a framework. It's an ORM. Does anyone remember what ORM stands for before I type it in Larry Sheets again?
No, I don't remember.
It is an object relational mapper. So break that down a little bit. The objects are what we work with, right? We can say user.password or user.username or user.email, right? And when we interact with the objects coming back from SQL, Sequelize, they're just like regular objects. But what it is doing, it is mapping that object into our relational database. It is relating the object using the model to what is stored in our database. So it is taking the relational data and mapping it into an object, and it can also take an object and map that into our relational database. So Sequelize is an object relational mapper. If we don't use an ORM, how do we have to execute our code in JavaScript to get our Postgres to know about it? Anyone remember what we did before we did Sequelize? What did we have to use with PG? What did we have to write into our code in order to get our database to update?
Body parser.
SQL queries.
SQL queries. Yep. We had to actually write out the whole insert into users, parentheses, the column names, values, and then we had to use a template literal. And there are all kinds of security issues there. So we can connect to our database in our backend without using Sequelize, that object relational mapper. But the point of using Sequelize is that it's abstracting the SQL out for us, so we can just work with our objects and save it into the database, and it's going to map between the relational data and the objects that we're working with. Okay, so let's take a step back. We said MVC, model view controller. Well, we've got our models, which are how we connect to the database. What's our view?
The front end.
The front end, yeah, our view is what the user is seeing. So back in the old days, the back end would be responsible for making the whole page show up. The back end would actually return out the HTML, and the browser would go, oh, this is HTML, great, I know how to use that. But we have shifted to a more modern architecture, which is used widely enough in industry now that we've updated the curriculum. So our view is now all taken care of on the React front end. Whenever we create a new route and a new component, that is all considered the view layer of what we're pulling off. So that only leaves one more thing, the C, the controller. What kind of controls all of this information and makes all of this work?
Is it core?
Cores is kind of used, cores is part of our controller, but where do we write code that's kind of linking the model to the view?
Server.
The server, and in particular, our
API.
what?
URL?
Our
No?
API URLs, which are also sometimes called endpoints.
Routes.
Or routes. Yes, the routes on the back end as well. All kind of in that same family, right? You are all on the right track. So the controller is what sits between the model and the view. And why is it called the controller? Because it gets to control whether or not information gets into that model. So part of the controller is saying, hey, is the user signed in? If they're not signed in, they don't get to make a new post. Or it also works in reverse. Hey, we need to get the user information, but we want to make sure we control that not the whole user data comes out, because otherwise every user who loads the site would get access to password information. So the controller is sitting in between that. Now, REST and MVC are both in the same category of terms. Can anyone take a stab, and this is a shot in the dark here, of what REST and MVC would be considered? Two vastly different ideas, but what would those cluster under?
Did you say RES?
R-E-S-T, REST.
Oh, REST. Okay. Wanna
they-
make sure.
They both like manipulate and send like updates. There's like a it's not circular, but like a triangle. Like,
But kind of what concept would you call REST, or what would you call MVC? They're like a way to structure your code or structure how you do things. Anything come to mind for how you would plan out that kind of architecture or execute on that? These are called design paradigms in programming. And a design paradigm is not necessarily saying this is the code you have to write. It's saying, hey, this is kind of a guideline or a framework of how you should design your code. because it turns out that before MVC, people were shoving database queries in their front end code and then writing if statements around it. And you get this one giant file where you can't follow where anything is happening. So MVC was born to say, let's separate these out into 3 separate areas of our code. Now, the way that you do that in JavaScript is going to be slightly different than the way you do that in, say, Ruby on Rails, which is going to be different than the way you do that in PHP. But in all of those languages, you can follow that design paradigm and say, I can separate out my models, I can separate out my controllers, and I can separate out my view. And because of that, because you can do that in all languages, it is considered, or most languages, it is considered a design paradigm. You don't have to follow that design, those steps, but at the same time, it is recommended that you do to make your code easier to read. So that's one of those things that when you get into an interview, they may ask you, what's an MVC? Or how do you write code out as an MVC? Or can you tell me where you put the code in each step? You go, oh, well, a model, that's kind of using our ORM. That's the link between our API and our database. And then the view, well, that's what shows up to the end user. So that's what goes in React or our HTML. And then the controller is what bridges the gap between the model and the view. That's what happens in our endpoint. That's what's executing there. So you guys were taught a model view controller design paradigm without even realizing that you were using it. Just like you were taught how to use REST when Ryan came in and taught APIs without necessarily explicitly labeling this as a REST design paradigm.
And they did ask me if I knew about model view controllers when I went for my interview with Cherokee.
Yep. So that's important to touch on that because it is used across almost every full stack web framework. It is a encouraged design paradigm. And there are some others that don't use MVC that recommend you split up your code differently, but that is a good one to touch on. So last thing that I would like to touch on tonight, yeah, Zach, model is the layer that connects the API or controllers to the database. And the point of a model is that you're modeling out what the database looks like, and you're telling the backend what that model looks like. The controller is our API endpoints. That is what is controlling the flow of information between the view and the model. And then the view is our front end, right? That's what actually gets displayed to the end user. And sometimes it includes data from the model, but the basic flow there is that in order to get data into the view, it's got to go access a controller, and that controller is going to use a model. Okay, moving on, we have talked about one database type. What is the name of the database that we used?
Postgres.
Beekeeper?
Postgres. Beekeeper is not a database, and that's really important to draw a line between. Beekeeper is a tool, is a client that we use to connect to our database and execute queries. What else is a client that we use to connect to our database?
Oh, what else is a client?
Sqlize. Sqlize is a client that connects to our database. And we know that because if you look at the connection settings in Postgres, I'm sorry, in Beekeeper, those connection settings are going to look very similar to the information we put into the connection string in Sqlize. So in Beekeeper, our data actually isn't being stored in Beekeeper. It's getting stored in our Postgres server. We just use Beekeeper to connect in and access that data just like we connect in and SQLize to access that same data. So you can quit Beekeeper, you could uninstall Beekeeper, but as long as Postman is running on your computer, I'm sorry, not Postman, as long as Postgres is running on your computer, you can still access that information in the backend. And that's why when you turn off Postgres, both your backend and Beekeeper stop working, because Postgres is the one actually responsible for storing that data. So what kind of database is Postgres? Two different answers here.
SQL database.
It is a
Relational.
SQL. It is the SQL and relational. Bingo. Those are the two answers I was looking for. So SQL databases are always relational databases. Why are they called relational databases? What is the relation that they're talking about?
Between tables.
Between tables and rows between tables, yes. So that you can separate out your teachers and your students. And in your students, you can store a teacher ID, and that teacher ID is what relates it to the students. So they are relational databases when you do joins between tables to store your data in an efficient, non-duplicated manner. Zach, go ahead.
So like our databases that we have, like for our blog project, like we view the information with Beekeeper, that information isn't stored in our backend, it's stored in Postgres.
So this is kind of a sloppy industry term. Your database is considered part of your backend. So the way that I kind of look at it is, there's no way I'm going to be able to find that slide, am I? Your database is part of your backend, but is not part of your API. So the API is Express, and the API connects to your database server. But when you mention the backend is kind of made up of two parts. It's made up as part of your API is one, and then the other part is your database, which is the other one. So both your database is a server and your API, your Express, is another server, and those two servers talk to each other. And the broad category that encompasses both of those servers is your backend. And let me pull up let me see if I can pull it up quickly. So let me leave it up on this as a, oh, no, I want to share just this one. So I don't know if that visual helps. So basically every time that you go inside one of those boxes and narrow it down, you're labeling out what you're using. So yes, we have a front end, but our front end is using React as the framework. Yes, we have a back end, but our back end is really comprised of two things. It's comprised of both our Node API server and our database, which happens to be using Postgres. So what's bridging the gap there is our ORM at the model level to tell SQLize how to connect into our database.
Yeah.
So backend is a broad term to encompass not only our API server, but also our database server. But at no point do you ever connect your front end directly to your database. You need that controller level in the middle. So you can also think about this as our view over here, our models over here, and then our controller in here. Larry, go ahead.
So as far as the database is concerned, for Postgres, there's a file somewhere on our computer that is storing our database stuff.
Correct.
And then another like tab over spaces type of question for front end, back end, and full stack. Should they be separate words? Should they be combined or hyphenated? Like if you saw my resume and I said, hey, I'm a front end, back end, full stack, how would you
I
prefer to do
normally
it?
would say front space end space developer or full space stack space developer. That's a personal preference. I have seen it concatenated, which I personally think is wrong. I have seen it hyphenated, which I think is okay. I prefer a space, but maybe that is, I don't know that there's an industry standard around that.
Right, I know it's like one of those tab over spaces type of things. I was asking from a professional, but all right, thank you.
Yeah, in my opinion, spaces, second place tabs, and third place, or second place hyphenation, and then third place is all together. But I've certainly seen every way that you mentioned. Depending on how JavaScript heavy you are, you could also just camel case it and leave it up to the parser to go through. But I mean, that is the same argument of, Python uses snake case, which uses underscores, and JavaScript uses camel case, and you can start flame wars on, same tabs versus spaces level. Zach, go ahead with your question.
So if we deploy our code, like, will it not work if we don't, like, there's not a way to like deploy Postgres, right?
Well, you did, right? When you deployed your backend, you deployed your Postgres server. You set up a server and connected to that in your backend. So when you deploy a database, you're not really deploying the data in the database. You're just setting up the server so the backend can talk. The API server can talk to the database. So it's not necessarily about the data in the database. It is about the connection between the backend, the API server, and your database. So think about when you set the process.env.pg URL or whatever DB URL, what you were doing is you were modifying your SQLize to say, if Postgres, if Heroku is telling me where my database server is, I should use that. Otherwise, I'll connect on localhost 5432. What you were doing when you made that switch out of the URL is you were saying, instead of connecting to my local Postgres server that I'm running, I'm going to connect to the Postgres server Heroku is telling me to use. Now let that sink in, because I think you've got another question coming, but I'm going to go to Larry and then Doug and then Zach. I'll come back to you.
I was going to say that Nathan had us copy the data we had locally and then push that up to the database using Beekeeper as well. I mean,
so the way you did that is you use Beekeeper connected to your local database. You then exported that or copied that data out. Then you backed out of your local database, went into Beekeeper and connected to your deployed or your remote or your cloud database, right? So that was a new Postgres database that was sitting empty. You then pasted in any data that you had on your local database and hit run. When you hit run on that query wasn't being executed locally anymore. It was running that query on your cloud Heroku deployed database. Now your API backend was being told, instead of using my local Postgres, I'm going to use the deployed version of it.
Thank you.
I don't know if that's, thank you, Larry, for prompting me to go on a spiel about that, but I don't know if that's helping clarify things or just adding further confusion, but it is a very good point, because that is how it's working. Doug, go ahead.
So same topic, and it's been clarified a little with the previous questions, But so when we deployed our database to Heroku, it's not, we didn't like take our database and upload it like we do with our files. We're actually starting a new database and either not even copying, but
executing the SQL queries that was making your local database look like your production database.
okay, so it's a new database that we're just populating with all the same data.
And table structure and all of that, yes. Yeah, because it is easy to think, oh, well, I uploaded my backend code and now that code is running in Heroku. But you don't really upload your database. The way you upload a database is you execute the SQL queries on it. So the SQL queries, when you copied the whole local host and pasted it into production, you weren't actually copying and pasting a file. You were copying and pasting a long script with all the SQL in it that had create tables and insert intos and all of that stuff. So that when you went into your production database and copied it in, you weren't really copying it, you were copying all of the commands that made your local database look like your production database.
Got it. So you're more recreating it.
Yes, absolutely. And SQL files, I've worked with SQL files that are 30 gig. And it's like the data is inside those SQL files, but it's written in the SQL format to say insert into table these columns, these values. So that's not to say that there isn't data in SQL. It's just saying that the data is formatted in a way that can be executed in a SQL statement. So instead of copying the file, you're kind of copying the commands to make it look like the other database.
Thank you.
No problem.
So
Sanjay.
that's what you mean by like the framework of the database?
So SQLize is a framework that lets us interact with the database. Express is a framework that makes it easier for us to interact with Node. React is a framework that makes it easier for us to write interactive front ends. The database itself is Postgres. The framework we use to interact with that Postgres database is called SQLize. And the type of database Postgres is a SQL database, which means that we run those SQL commands, and any type of SQL database or SQL database, same thing, is a relational database, meaning that the data stored in it is set up to be related to each other. You asked a tiny question and I just gave you a huge answer, but I don't know if that answered your question.
Hey, Max,
Yeah.
can you do that, like explain like I'm 5 for other people possibly? Or no, is that past that point at this moment?
Uh,
I know you went on for a little bit there. I just didn't know if you could summarize it in like smaller, non-technical terms at all. If not, we can go over that later this week or next week.
yeah, so it all comes down to really this diagram, right? Do you understand the basic flow of this? Do you understand that our data is getting stored in the database? Should be an obvious statement, right? But the data gets stored in the database. We use SQLize to extract that information out of the database so we can use it in our API, which is built in Node and Express. And then we use the controller here to send that data to our view layer. Our view layer is on the front end, and we happen to use React for that. So the frameworks are just tools that we use to make it so we have to write less code. So if you think all the way back to, well, what did we do before React? We wrote out HTML code. And we had to use .inner HTML, and we had to generate all of this HTML. And every time that it changed, we had to write more code to go update that HTML. React is a framework that gives us access to tools like state and use effect, that make it easier for us to build out a web page that is using data. So the whole point of us touching on the MVC here is you already know how to write an MVC. All of your capstones are using model view controllers. It just so happens that our database that we're using are different tools. And that's what we mean when we say we use a stack. What stack are we using? We're using React, we're using Node and Express, and we're using SQLize with a Postgres database. So that means a SQL database. Postgres is just a type of SQL database. So when you're after graduation, people will say, well, what stack do you use or what stack did you learn? And you can rattle off React, Node, Express, SQLize, and Postgres. Those are all of the tools that we happen to use using an MVC paradigm. So the explain it like I'm 5 is kind of taking it all the way down to that model view controller layer. The view is what shows up in the front end. The controller is what's controlling the data. And then the data itself is in the model portion of it. So the technical way that we pull all of that off is all of these arrows, right? Is flowing through the front end, and that's the fetch and getting all of that working. But from the design paradigm level, we've got a front end and a back end. The front end is the view. The back end is comprised of the model, which is the database, and the API server that we made, which is the controller.
No, that helped. It was the beginning part more than anything. So thank you. And I'm sorry, Shranjay, I didn't mean to cut you off. I know your hand's up.
Shranjay, go ahead.
You kind of clarified some things. I just need you, can you help me with something when class ends before you jump off?
Sure, no problem. Okay, so one last thing I can wrap up is we've talked a lot about SQL, and there are other SQL databases. MySQL is a very popular one, MySQL. Oracle has one, and Microsoft has one called Microsoft SQL Server. Those are probably the 4 most common SQL databases off the top of my head. That may have changed a little bit, but those are the 4 most common ones that I can think of. Can someone think of an alternative to a relational database?
MongoDB.
MongoDB, that is the most common form of what kind of database?
Non-relational.
You can tell we are very strong in the developer community for naming things. Well, if you have a relational database, what other kinds of databases can you have? Well, a non-relational database. That is quite literally the right answer. Those are the only 2 database types that I could name off the top of my head. I'm sure there are others out there, but Mongo, unlike SQL has all those different variants, right? There's a good market share between Microsoft, Oracle, MySQL, and Postgres. Those are when you say, oh, I use a SQL database, you've got a pretty much even shot of getting any one of those 4 that an employer uses. And they all have minor strengths and weaknesses between them. When you say, oh, I use a non-relational database, a good probably 3/4 of non-relational databases use Mongo. How do we kind of structure data differently in Mongo, or what kind of format does Mongo store? Does anyone know?
Objects.
It uses objects, and it doesn't technically use it, but what is related to objects? How do we pass objects back and forth on the internet? What format do we use?
JSON.
JSON. So Mongo, believe it or not, is a JSON-based database. It stores all of our data using JSON. So it's non-relational, that that one row in the database doesn't relate to another row in the database. Instead, Mongo calls its rows documents. Every time you insert a new row into the database, it inserts a new document. And then if you want to relate some data together, let's say you've got your teachers, instead of making a separate table called students, you create a new collection, which is like another table. But when you want to relate data together, instead of putting your students in another table, what you would do is create a students array and store the students' information directly in the teacher's document. So that breaks a major rule of our SQL databases, right? There are those 3 rules, and one of them is you can't store multiple values in one field. You're not supposed to store arrays. You're not supposed to store anything that has multiple values. You put that in another table and you relate that data together. In Mongo throws the rules of normalization out the window and says, store an array in our database. It's all JSON, go for it. So Mongo is unique in that it's very flexible and does not require a model layer. In Mongo, you do not need to structure your tables in advance. You can throw data in there all willy-nilly and it will take it. So major differences between Mongo and SQL. It is important to be able to just touch on a couple of them. SQL is better at scaling what they call scaling vertically. SQL is very good for being able to throw more RAM at the server, throw more storage at it, throw more CPU power. And SQL likes to grow by just getting a more and more powerful server. Compared to Mongo, which scales horizontally. Mongo scales very well by saying, instead of making this one server bigger and bigger, we're going to make a bunch of little servers that are going to share the load together. And based off of its data structure being more flexible, it makes it easier to scale those servers horizontally. So when you scale vertically, you're making that one server bigger and bigger and bigger. When you scale horizontally, you keep on adding more and more servers. So still a database, still stores data. The concept of the database does not go away. The way we structure the data in the database is either relationally or non-relationally. And because of that, that makes the server scale differently. Any questions on that, Doug? I know you have your hand up.
Yeah, so in the non-relational database, with the example of teachers and students, if you have student objects and teacher objects, and the teacher has a class, so it's an array of students, is that array?
It would be one collection called teachers. A collection is like a table. And then inside that collection, which you would call teachers, there would be a teacher's document, which would represent a row in a database. And inside those teachers, you would have 2 arrays, one called students and one called classes. And inside that array, each student would get their own subdocument or their own object.
And is that where all the data is together, or are these student objects in another?
All the data is stored there together.
So is a non-relational database just one big file with like arrays and objects nested?
Not necessarily one big file, but yes, it is a bunch of JSON. And the way that you design that JSON is very different because it breaks the rules of normalization. So designing for a Mongo database, while it gives you the freedom to put whatever data in it, it is easier to get sloppier with your data because it is so flexible. So the flexibility is a double-edged sword in that it lets you put your data wherever you want it, but it is the flip side of that sword is you need to be careful that when you duplicate data across multiple collections, that when you say update that information, you also remember to update it in all the collections.
Okay, so the same information can be stored in different places.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Mongo is an interesting, it's like no rules, go crazy, but at the same time, that flexibility can be a downfall as well. Well, I updated my name in my users table, but I also have that name in my students table or my students collection. So I need to remember to update both of them. So Mongo, it's certainly a different way of thinking. And the reason we teach SQL is that while SQL has been around for 50 years and has been the dominant language, the dominant database type, Mongo definitely has a significant market share that's worth mentioning. And so we still think that because SQL is more widely used, that's what we teach. But it's important enough to know, hey, what are the differences between the two of them? Because that could come up on an interview. Sanjay, your question is for end of class, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just gonna lower your hand for now. Okay, I know it's 8:30. The only thing I wanted to touch on is during a whiteboarding interview, you're gonna be asked to do something on the spot. You're gonna be given a task like, given this array, make all the items show up on an HTML page. Or you're gonna be given a take-home test where they say, create a front end and back end that connects to a database and shows this information. So a whiteboarding interview is meant to kind of put you on the spot. It is meant to say, here's this challenge, go complete this challenge. The two most important tips I have for you: when you get the challenge, do not open a text editor and start going at it. You want to plan before you write a single line of code. And the point of a whiteboard interview is to see not only your thinking style, but also that you can question things. Because when you get on the job, you're going to be given a task and you're going to have no idea what it is. So when you are given that task, you need to ask the follow-up questions of, how do I accomplish this? So a whiteboarding interview, you would like to plan in advance, start jotting down notes, start thinking about your approach and all the different steps you need to do. Think back to what we did in Trello yesterday for the password reset. Break it down into those tasks so that when you're executing on it, you can actually pull it off. As important as it is to be able to get your code working, it is equally important to be able to explain your code as you're working on it. If you can kind of talk through what you're writing and what you're trying to accomplish, the interviewer is not only going to see how you approach problem solving, but when you get stuck somewhere, if you are being vocal and trying to explain what's going through your head, the interviewer may be able to help you out or give you a tip along the way. But if you just approach this and open up a text editor and start writing code, they're going to have no idea what your approach is to this. So if you get into a technical interview, which is what they will call it, they won't call it a whiteboard interview, and it is live, my two tips: plan it out, figure out what your steps are, and spend at least 5 minutes doing that. Don't dive right into the code. Don't panic. Take a step back from the code and think back to, how do I break down this problem? What steps am I going to need to do to get that to work? Once you have that all documented, Max pro tip number 2, as hard as it is, talk through your code as you're writing it. Switch into Max mode. Think back to class. Think back to, as I'm writing the code, how I'm explaining it. You need to be able to do that for the interviewer. You need to be able to explain your code, explain your thought process, because you might be wrong, you might get stuck somewhere, and by being able to explain your code, you're giving them you're shooting out a life raft that is allowing them to kind of pull you back in and get you back on track if you go off. But if you freeze up at that, where do I even start? You've missed a step. The step you've missed, plan it out, break down what they're asking you to do. And once you get those steps, ask the interviewer. Say, hey, what do you think about this? Am I missing anything? A good interviewer is going to go through those steps with you and help you identify where they are lost. Or they're going to be a mean interviewer and go, yeah, sure, looks fine. that's okay. At least you've got the plan. At least you have shown that interviewer that I can be a true engineer, because believe it or not, the hard part of engineering is not actually writing the code and getting the syntax down. It's the processes of breaking down a step, an engineering task into smaller steps that you can execute on. That's what you want to show the interviewer. Any questions on whiteboard interviews? I know we're already over time, but an important thing to know that may be coming. The typical interviewing process, you're going to have a screener. That screener is typically with an HR person or someone who is not technical. That person may not know the difference between Java and JavaScript. Do not be prepared for them to answer questions of like, what is the day-to-day flow like as an engineer on your team? They are an HR person. They probably don't know that. All they know is what's put on the job description in front of them. From there, you normally move on to meeting with your engineering manager. They're going to be the person who's running the team. They're going to be the ones who start to ask you more technical questions. If you make it past that step, you typically move on to the whiteboarding interview or a take-home assessment. That is going to be either project-based or a whiteboarding interview. Hey, here's this array, go through the array and filter through everything. An interviewing question could be something as simple as, here's this array of the cars data, return out all of the models where the make is Tesla. Or it could be something as complex as, here's a take-home interview, go complete this project. Before you get into a technical assessment, you need to ask, what is the language that you're testing me on? Because you're going to need to be prepared. Some employers will say you can do it in any language, at which point you should run streaming to JavaScript and HTML and the tools that you know. Some companies will say, we don't want you to use Bootstrap. We want you to use all your own CSS. There will be, every employer will have a different setup for their technical test. Some employers will say, the position is in Ruby and Rails. You have to complete the test in Ruby and Rails. Totally depends on the employer. From the technical test, if you pass that, you tend to go on to a culture fit. That's when you get to actually meet other members on your team. You should have questions prepared at every stage of the interview except the technical test. So you should have questions prepared of, what does a day-to-day, what does a day look like in a member for a role on your team, right? What does my day, where do I start my day? What kind of project management are you using? What's your company culture? What kinds of meetings am I expected to sit in on? What kind of mentorship can I expect as a junior developer? These are all really good questions to ask. And also ask them very early on. I would ask in the first interview in the screener, can you tell me every step of your interview process? Because the HR person may not know any technical questions, but they will be able to answer what their interview process looks like. Some companies may only have 2 interviews and not have a technical test. Some companies may have an 8-stage interview. Depends on the company. Ask that very early on. But ones you should be expected for are the screener or the get to know you with the HR person, an interview with the manager on your team, a technical test, whether it is live and a screen share, or it is a take-home one, a culture fit, getting to talk to a couple people on the team. That is all about, do you fit in well? Do they like you? Do you like them? And then finally, you get to the offer stage. Hopefully, Laura has reviewed all of this. Does any of this, is this new information for anyone? So just a review there. And then the last thing I will say, I know I keep saying the last thing, is never accept the first offer. They are going to lowball you every single time, unless this is for a grant position where they have a predefined budget. Whatever number they give you, chances are is not the highest number that they can offer you. And if it is, there is absolutely nothing wrong with asking for more and getting told, no, we can't offer you anymore. At TwoZag, we don't lowball you. We give you the offer that we think you are worth. And we tell you that when we give you the offer, we say, this is what we can give you. We don't have much room to negotiate. And you can try, you can come back and say, hey, can I get more vacation time? There's more ways to negotiate than just your salary. You can negotiate time off. You can negotiate your sick time. You can negotiate, depending on the size of the company, equity, which means stocks. You can negotiate your health insurance as well and say, okay, well, what kind of insurance am I going to get from a role like this? Obviously, there's a lot of room that you can negotiate in salary, and you don't want to over negotiate yourself, but at the same time, never accept the first offer that you get when you get a job offer.
I think that's really good advice. I think a lot of people don't know that the offer that they're giving you is like, it's a range. So that price is probably the bare minimum, but for your position, you can get up to like 2 times that.
And worst case scenario, you ask to negotiate and they say, sorry, we can't. Okay, you tried, how you know, right? So it really depends on the employer.
How do you know how much, like 5% more than what they're asking, or X amount? Like, is it just depend on the job and what you think it's worth?
Depends on the job, depends on the experience that they're asking for. Ariel has mentioned for me to share a blog post, which is software developer and engineering job titles. I will post that in the chat and also post that in Slack.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. That really helped me, and I'm a year out, you guys. He explained the difference between entry and junior and senior, and I wasn't applying to the correct jobs until I read that and figured out where my niche was. So that's the only reason I recommended it. Sorry to cut you off. That blog was really helpful for me.
So the industry has a real big problem of they just say junior level software developer, or they say senior level software developer. But from my years of experience I had and teaching, there is a big difference between someone who just graduated a boot camp or is self-taught or has a 4-year college degree and someone who has 2 or 3 years of professional job experience. And so from my view, this is a totally, in my opinion, this is not a dictation of what the industry does. But in my view, there really needs to be more than junior and senior. There needs to be entry level, junior, and senior. And so I just hired a graduate of the program where TUZAG is not qualified to hire entry level positions. I would love to hire a couple of you. Can't do that right now based off of where our company is at. But Caitlin, graduate of the program, went and worked for Raymore and Flanagan for 3 years, got the professional experience that she needed to move out of what I consider entry level to that junior level position, and we snapped her up immediately. So I like to identify, hey, is this an internship level? Is this something that I'm expected to come in with only a year or 2 of experience and work on? Or is this a job where I do need another professional experience position, a couple years of that before I'm ready to go into junior, which is different from senior. I can take on a task and complete it all on my own. So that's just a blog post that I wrote as kind of a rant of, hey, the industry needs to identify that there's a difference between entry level and junior level. But again, that is opinionated, and that is not where the industry necessarily is at. That was just my view on what I have seen from hiring. Okay, I'm sorry, I kept you guys way over. My bad. Christy, go ahead. You guys are all welcome to head out. Don't feel obligated to stick around. I'm happy.
Feedback, please, though. Please, sorry.
What? Oh, fill out the feedback form. Yes.
Please, for next cohort, it helps, guys. Sorry.
Well, for tomorrow's class, it helps. If there's anything that you need recovered or you think was painful today, let me know, and I can I'll read the responses tonight.
A splitter for more, to have more than one monitor. What can you?
I don't think the M1 chip support more than one monitor. Do you have M1s or M2s? I think you have M1s.
What do we do about this, Apple? What about this Mac?
Well, depending on like where you work, they might give you a computer. You
that is
might-
a very good
Talking
point.
about my house. I'm not talking about. It says, yeah, it's an M1 2020.
Yeah, so you can only have one external monitor in addition to the monitor on the laptop. So it's not a port
So
issue.
if I buy a splitter, it's not gonna do it.
It's going to put two of the same image on the monitor. It's like it will make it be in mirror mode. You can't put it in extend.
Okay.
How, I thought you had an iPad.
So
Right,
yeah,
and I
you
have
can
monitor.
you can use your iPad as an extended screen. So like so you can plug in your monitor, your external monitor, and then in AirPlay you can use your iPad as an extended screen. Like I have my 24-inch monitor plugged in, and then my old iMac, I'm using that as an extended screen by AirPlay.
Yeah, so the only thing that counts towards the external displays is external displays plugged in via like USB-C or HDMI. That's what the external monitor limit is for. And Larry's totally right. You can get around that limit by using an iPad as another display.
Yeah, my
But
iPad shows up. It showed up, but I didn't, because I was trying to use okay.
Yeah, but there is a limit to the M1 Max, unfortunately. M1 Mac, MAC'(S) of one
What?
external display.
What's the status of the laptops? Do we?
I will have an update for you at tomorrow's class.
Okay.
I can